Okay, great. All right, well, thank you very much for inviting me. We'll host the spotlight review. Okay, let me start screen sharing here. Let's see. Okay, you should be seeing my slides now, I hope.
Yep.
Okay, fabulous. All right, well, thanks again for inviting me. I appreciate it. So as was mentioned in the intro, I spent a month in Australia in September 2016 with my friend Chris. It was supposed to be a group tour and we were the only ones that signed up, so it became a private tour. And as mentioned, Australia is the home of the parrots, and both Chris and I do have parrots. All my parrots are Australian, whereas hers come from around the world. So we were very interested in going to Australia. And Australia is actually number 4 in the world for parrots, but it's number 1 for endemic parrots, which are birds that are restricted just to Australia. And you can, of course, understand that with Australia being a continent, that it wouldn't be too easy for their birds to be anyplace else. So we thought this would be a great place to go spend a month. And of course, we saw lots of other things as well, but the focus of the tour was on parrots. And to give you an idea of where we went, this is Australia. And for scale, Australia is about the same size as the US, though we have 330 million people and they have only about 25 million. So their people are pretty much scattered around the edges of the continent. And the whole interior is the familiar Australian outback. So we flew in to Sydney, then immediately flew out to Alice Springs in the Northern Territories. And we spent about a week in this area around here. We flew to Brisbane and immediately out to Southwest Queensland in this area. And we spent a week there around a place called Bowra Station. It's a research station. They do a lot of work with birds and other species. Then we flew back to Brisbane, spent a few days right in this area, then flew up to Cairns and we spent another week up around this area, then flew down to Adelaide and then spent a week down around this area, and then flew to Sydney and spent one day there and flew out. So we covered a lot of the eastern part of the country. We didn't get out to the western areas at all. And there are a lot of other parrot species and birds out there that we didn't get to. So first I'm going to start with Alice Springs. Now, this isn't a good photo, but this was our first parrot and it happened to be a galah, which is a type of cockatoo that both Chris and I have. So we were very excited to see the galah as our very first parrot. Moving on, the next parrot we saw is called an Australian ringneck. Now, Alice Springs isn't very big, but in the little downtown area, they had a lot of little sidewalk cafes. And we were sitting at one of the tables eating breakfast, and these birds came in. And that's a sugar packet in its mouth. Now, I should mention the Australian ringneck's not at all related to the Indian ringneck, if you've heard of that bird. That's another type of parrot from India and that area. It's native to Asia, but now it's found as an invasive species over much of the world. This is a totally different bird despite the similar name. And this bird has 4 different subspecies, and we saw 2 of them. So this is called the Port Lincoln ringneck, and you'll see one of the other subspecies later in the talk. So that's a sugar packet in its mouth, and they would fly down and they would steal the sugar packets and fly up into the trees, open them up and eat the sugar. Not really sure why, since these are birds that don't eat nectar or fruit naturally. So we're not really sure where they got a sweet tooth, but they clearly did. And here you can see what they actually do with the packets. Most of the sugar, of course, just falls on the ground, so it does create quite the mess. And they fly down to the tables and they pretty much pinch anything you're eating. They go through everything. One of the lower right's doing a cracker. And if any of you have been to the Caribbean, you'll know it's the same thing as there. I remember the very first time I went to the Caribbean, and the banana quits and the other birds would just fly down to your breakfast and start drinking your juice and eating your fruit and everything. So they're not at all afraid of humans, and they've learned that humans are a source of food. They do put up little containers in the trees for them with more appropriate food for them, and they do go up there and eat, but they still prefer the human food. This is the kind of thing they eat in the wild, little scrubby green stuff, seeds and shoots. In fact, the Australian parrots in general are ground feeders, and they all tend to feed on the ground and eat lots of fresh green stuff. And here you can see one eating what it's supposed to be eating. This is a medium-sized bird, about the size of a jay. You know, what's fun about Australia, if you haven't been there, is when you get there, you won't recognize any of the birds other than the ubiquitous house sparrow and pigeon, and you won't recognize any of the bird songs. So it's kind of like being a beginner birder again, that you really don't know anything when you get there. And September is springtime there, so we saw lots of birds doing what comes naturally. And here are some galahs. I have to show them. I think they're the most beautiful birds. The cockatoos tend to be sexually dimorphic, so you can tell the males and females apart. In the galahs, the way you do that is with the eye color. So the males have solid, very dark eyes like this, and the females have red eyes like this. Again, here we are ground feeding. A lot of times cockatoos will dig up shoots or dig up the little bulbs at the base of grasses and eat those. There's something called onion grass there, which is completely different from the onion grass we have here in the US, but they dig those up and they'll eat the little like tubers or corms at the bases of those. I think everyone can agree this is a gorgeous bird. And the place we were staying had some feeders out, and here's some galahs. The ones that are up on the feeders are juveniles, and you can tell they're juveniles because they have a gray wash across their chest. And then that's dad down in the lower right. All right, budgies or budgerigars. I'm sure most of you know what these are because they're the most common pet bird. And you've probably all seen photos or videos of these huge swarms or murmurations, like our starling murmurations, but of budgies in Australia, where you'll see thousands and thousands of them. Well, other than one brief group of budgies that flew across the car, this was basically it. We saw this one male. We're very grateful we got to see one male because it would have been heartbreaking not to see any, but this was the extent of it. And we think the reason for this is because normally the outback is, as you would expect, very, very dry, rarely rains. But they were having a very unusual rainy season out there, and it was raining quite a bit most of the days, in fact, on our trip. And normally you go to water holes to see birds because there are some fixed water holes that never evaporate. And all you have to do is sort of camp out by the water holes, and that's when you'll see all your birds. But it was raining so much that there was water everywhere, and the birds didn't have to go to the water holes. And keep in mind that water holes are going to place them at greater danger because the predators also know to go there. So we think that's why we didn't see the large flocks of budgies that people often do in this area. So anyhow, this is a male. Budgies can be, you can tell their sex by the cere, which is this area right here above the beak. In males, it's blue, and in females, it's sort of a light fleshy color. We think he had a nest nearby, though we couldn't find it, and he was probably standing guard. Female was probably with the eggs because he wouldn't leave. He wasn't afraid of us. He was clearly a little bit wary, but he wouldn't leave the area. Got a little video of him. It was very, very windy there, so I did have my camera on a monopod, but it often became difficult to even hold that still. One thing about most parrots, by the way, I don't know if you can see this last shot, he looks like his eye is very focused, the pupil is very tiny. Many parrots can actually have control over their irises, so they can contract or dilate their eyes at will. Unlike us, we have zero control over that. And even though this bird is very little, he's not afraid of us. All right, not the greatest picture, but I had to show this bird because of the great pictures, the great colors. So they have these birds called fairy wrens there. I think there are like 5 or 6 different varieties of them. The names are very difficult to sort out. So this gorgeous bird is called the splendid fairy wren. There's also a superb fairy wren that you'll see later on. And I honestly, as a birder, don't know how you would, it's taken me forever to try and remember which one is splendid and which one is superb, given that those are both sort of equivalent words, but anyhow, they certainly appreciate their fairy wrens there. This is a plant called a pattymellon. There's also an animal called a pattymellon you'll see later on, a marsupial. It's spelled differently. But as you can guess, looking at it, this is in the watermelon family. I think it's native to Africa, and it is an invasive in Australia, but it's everywhere in the outback, and it provides a welcome source of moisture to a lot of animals. A lot of animals eat this. Unfortunately, it's extremely bitter, which I didn't quite believe because it really looks like a watermelon. So we split one open, I tasted it, and it's extremely astringent. But I guess if I was lost in the outback and I had no other source of liquid, I probably would eat this. So back at the place we stayed, outside the window, there were all these beautiful little zebra finches. It's a bird we generally know of only in the US from aviaries, but it was a delight to see it in the wild there. And this is a female. This is a bird that you find in a lot of flocks. Australia has lots of these little finch birds. Another female, and this is the brightly colored male. I saw so many gorgeous plants in Australia, plants and flowers, mainly because it was raining. So many things were coming into view that they hadn't seen in many years. So there were flowers everywhere. I wasn't able to identify most of them, but I had to include one in this talk, even though I have enough pictures to do a talk completely on flowers. But this was a flower that I very much wanted to see before I even went to Australia. It's called the Sturt's Desert Pea. And I was lucky enough, we were just walking along a street, just a suburban street, and there was a patch of them on the side of the road. And to me, it's just the most magnificent, bizarre, Dr. Seuss-like plant. And each of these, this is like one flower, each of those is about the size of a closed fist. So they're rather large and just magnificent. I want to show you a road in Australia. Now, up where we were, most of the roads weren't paved at all. In fact, that's true of a lot of the interior of Australia. You generally only see paving around the outer rim of Australia and in the more urban areas. Excuse me. What's interesting looking at this is the pavement is only 1 lane wide. And I asked, why is that and what do you do with that? And so apparently you drive down the middle of the road. When you come across another car, you pull off to the side and have one set of wheels on the dirt and one set on the pavement, and the other car does that, and that's how you pass. Because you rarely see cars out here. And they said the reason for that is because their population is so small, they don't have the tax base to be able to pay for all the miles or kilometers, in their case, of paving like we do in the US. So they only pave when absolutely necessary. Now, of course, if it is raining, it does get fairly muddy there on the side, which is why you always want to keep one set of wheels on the pavement. I had to show this sign. This was in the middle of nowhere because this is so typically Australian. If you drink and drive, you're a bloody idiot. It's such an Australian thing to say. And of course, it's sponsored by their football team, which is our soccer. And the last thing we did up in the Alice Springs area is go to Uluru, which is a sacred native Aboriginal site. It's actually not in Alice Springs. It's about 4 hours away. But Chris and I took a bus there one day. And it's beautiful land driving out there. Now, normally when you've seen pictures of Uluru, it's this large rock that's sticking up from a desert, which is how it normally looks. But because it's been raining so much, everything was lush and green. So you don't see many pictures of it looking like this. In fact, we were told that it's been so many years since they had so much rain out there, at least 30 or 40 years, that botanists were having a field day because all these species of plants were coming out. And the last time anyone had seen them, nobody was cataloging them now. So now they had all these beautiful flowers and plants that they had no record of. So now they were trying to catalog these things for the first time. While we were there, the whole day was raining. It was pouring rain the whole day. And when it came time, it was closest to sunset. They have this little thing where with the bus where they pull down the side of the bus and they have a barbecue for you. And you sit, they take you to a picnic area and you sit out there and have this barbecue dinner they make for you. It was raining so hard though, they were still trying to barbecue and we'd run inside the bus and eat. And we didn't really think we'd get any good pictures. And this is sort of a spot they often take you to get good shots, other than, there's this one rogue tree in the middle. But all of a sudden, about 5 minutes before sunset, the rain stopped. And it got this glow, because you only get that glow at sunset. And this magnificent rainbow came out right across there. We ran outside, took a bunch of photos, absolutely magnificent. 5 minutes later, it started to rain again and then continued the rest of the night. So we were really very fortunate to be able to get this beautiful view. And a rainbow over Uluru is a very rare thing to see. So we were extremely happy with that. Of course, there are all kinds of lovely birds out there. There were no parrots, so I didn't include any of those photos. Next, we went out to this place in southwest Queensland called Bowers Station. As I mentioned, it's a research station there. It has water year round. There's a lake there. I'm not sure where it gets its water, but because it does have water, it's a very common place to see all kinds of birds. So it's one of the key birding spots if you go to Australia. What I was most happy about was seeing cockatiels, which are my favorite bird. Excuse me. The old time we were in Alice Springs, we were supposed to see cockatiels and never saw a single one. We were supposed to see kangaroos, never saw a single one. So here we are. We're starting the second week of the trip, and I haven't seen a kangaroo and I haven't seen a cockatiel. So I was beginning to despair, but of course, the very first bird I saw when we got to Parrot Station were cockatiels, and these are 2 males. Cockatiels are sexually dimorphic. These 3 birds are females, and they like to hang out in snags. So females, they both have orange cheeks, but the females are muted, and the males have bright yellow heads. The females also have stripes on their tails, and you'll see they have bars on the underwings, on their underwings, which the males don't have. These are 2 more females. And this is a male, so you can see the difference. I've lived with cockatiels most of my life, so this was my #1 bird to see. Another beautiful male. It was very windy there, so their crests would go off to the side. One thing that all cockatoos have are crests. So cockatiels are the smallest of the cockatoos. The largest are the palm cockatoos, but the thing that they all have in common is the crest. And crests aren't just ornamental like they are with, for example, jays and cardinals, but in cockatoos, the crests are expressive. So they go up and down and they will indicate what the mood of the bird is. You can see here the stripes on the underside of her tail. And of course, lots of mating birds. You see a lot of birds on barbed wire. There's a lot of barbed wire in Australia everywhere, which I will mention later in the talk. how it adversely affects species. But you'll see a lot of birds hang out on barbed wire. That's a male on the right, female on the left. Cocktails are very fast flyers, up to 70 miles an hour. So it's really hard to get photos of them flying, but I managed to get one. And male and female. It was raining again, of course. And if you've ever had cocktails or lived with them, the interesting thing about seeing birds in the wild is our birds that we live with in our home are not domesticated like cats and dogs. So the ones we live with have the same exact natural behaviors as the ones in the wild. And I strongly encourage anybody who lives with parrots to go see them in the wild and really appreciate what it's like for them to live a wild life as they should be living. But you'll see the same exact behaviors in them. I have a few videos so you can see. They have a preening gland at the base of their back that has oil. So they rub their beaks in the oil and spread it on their feathers to keep them in good condition. And a lot of birds, not all birds, but a lot of wild birds of all different species also have a preening gland. Sorry, there's so many cocktail photos, but as my favorite bird, they have to be in here a lot. So this guy up here is doing typical flirting behavior, and I'm going to show you a video, but what cocktails do is they put their wings out a little bit, and it's called hearting, and it's just, and then they whistle a lot, and that's how they attract the females. Okay, here you can see he's annoying this female, so she's saying to back off. And you can see the barring on the tails and the barring on the wings. Males are solid underneath. So what's going on here is he's trying to flirt with this female. And every time he comes down, she's saying, back off, I'm not interested. But he keeps trying because that's what they do. And it gets to the point where he just has to look at her and she just keeps saying no, no. And if you listen closely, you can hear him singing now. And she could not care less. So she's finally had enough and flown off. So he's coming down now. And you see in a second, he's decided now he wants to try to flirt with one of the other females who's down at the lower left. She also isn't interested in him. So at this point, he actually gave up and flew to another tree that also had female cocktails and started the routine over again for them. Now, this is what they eat in the wild. As I keep mentioning, the parrots in Australia, they do tend to eat on the ground. If you go to South America, the South American parrots tend to be arboreal, so they will be up in the trees and they'll be eating fruit and things like that up there. But in Australia, they pretty much all ground feed. So here, this female is eating various shoots and things that she finds. And they just walk around. If you remember, flying is very energy intensive. So there are a lot of birds that would prefer to walk. It just takes less energy. They will fly when they need to, but they do prefer to just walk around. Oh, and I should mention, by the way, because I'm sure most of you are aware of birders' code of ethics, that you don't play, or you try to minimize playing bird songs to bring birds in. I don't think they have something similar in Australia, because our bird guide immediately he pulled out his phone and wanted to play various songs, and I shut that down really quickly. And he was a little bit upset. He's like, well, we may not be able to see certain birds. And I said, that's fine, but I strongly believe you really shouldn't play songs unless absolutely necessary. It upsets birds. It may upset them nesting. It may upset them courting. And I'd rather just see what I can see. And particularly when we were there was nesting season. So I certainly didn't want to interrupt any birds from doing what they need to do by playing songs to try to bring them in. This is a sulfur-crested cockatoo. It's our first sign. You'll see more later on. And a lot of these gloomy days because it was raining so much. But this is one of their most common cockatoos. You see these everywhere. They're very common, particularly in urban areas where they're very clever. They're kind of like the equivalent of our raccoons. They're very skilled at getting the tops off of garbage cans and getting in there and basically just finding everything they can to eat. Oh, more galahs. Galahs, they don't raise their crest a lot, but when you do, you see they have just like a very small crest that they raise. Oh, another juvenile. Grooming. Again, like the other parrots, walking around eating. They love to chew on wood. It probably helps keep their beak sharp and provides mental stimulation. It's a form of play. There's another female. The underwings are also this bright raspberry sherbet color. So really very attractive birds. And here's a female walking around, and her eyes are pinning because she's just so excited at this bounty of food there. Like she can't wait to get her beak on everything. And you'll be walking along and there are just all these little heads in the grass. You can hear there in the background a lot of buzzing, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. All right, these are little corellas. There are three types of corellas. Corellas are another cockatoo. And there are three types in Australia: the little corella, the long-billed, and the western. And we saw two of them. And these guys are just little clowns. They love to hang and scream, and they seem to spend a good deal of their day just playing. And then what you're seeing is just play. It serves no other function. It's not gathering food or a mating ritual or anything. It's very typical of a cockatoo to hang upside down and scream. Unfortunately, because they are so noisy and they can be fairly destructive to things like crops, a lot of people do not like the cockatoos, and farmers will shoot them if they descend on the crops. You can see this one here on the right wants a head rub from this one, but this one is busy chewing on the wood. They just love chewing the bark off trees. It's not like woodpeckers that chew the bark to get at the insects underneath. They're just chewing the bark for fun. they can really dismantle a tree if they want to. And then here you can see them just playing. Unfortunately, their beautiful looks and their playful nature is why so many parrots are stolen from the wild for the domestic pet trade. All right, this beautiful bird is a Leadbetter's cockatoo, also known as a Major Mitchell's cockatoo or a pink cockatoo. It's actually more of a salmon colored than a pink. And it's another beautiful bird. It has a gorgeous crest and beautiful salmon underneath. A lot of times you will see them hanging around with the gloves as well. Again, feeding on the ground, chewing all the green stuff. Parrots are the only bird that actually use their foot to hold food. So they will grab food with their foot and bring it to their mouth, which is not something you'll see any other bird do. This was a group. They flew off into some trees, and Chris and I followed them. We thought they'd fly away, but like much of the wildlife there, they really just weren't afraid of us. So we were able to get up close with them. A lot of the cockatoos are pink or white. Doesn't make a lot of sense because there's a lot of mud out there, so they get really dirty. I guess it just washes out, but it always seems strange for that to be the color. See, there's a lot of allopreening, so the birds will preen each other. This is a beautiful female I was watching. I just love the look. It was very windy, which is why her crest is so messed up. So they have a beautiful red, yellow, and orange rainbow crest. I couldn't get one of those classic shots just because of the wind there. Talk about a bad hair day here. You can see how windy it was. And the feathers are actually blowing away. This is where that preen gland is with the oil. Yeah, parrots in flight tend to be really noisy. So if you're around a lot of them, which you'll see in a bit, it can be quite deafening. This beautiful parrot is called a mulga parrot. It's a smallish parrot, and this is the male. The females don't have the bright coloration. Unfortunately, only saw a couple of these. All right, this is a pale-headed rosella. Now, rosellas are a group of species. I think there are maybe 5 or 6 different species. What they have in common is they have a cheek patch that's different colored from everything else, and the back has a scallop pattern. And within each species, there tend to be a lot of different races or different colorations. And even among the same race of the bird, you'll see a tremendous variation. So no two birds will look alike. And the colors can be quite different. And I put this photo up because later on you're going to see another pale-headed rosella that's the same exact species but looks quite different. This one you can see the colors are very muted. This is a female red-winged parrot. And here she is again, lovely bird. Just a little bit of red on the wings. And this is a male. This is a juvenile. When he's full grown, this entire patch here will be all red. This is a rainbow bee eater. It's the only species of bee eater they have. I love bee eaters, but the reason I put this one in, even though it's a little backlit, is because you can see I actually watched it catch this bee, so hence the name. All right, so I don't know if any of you have been to Australia, but Australia is really the land of the flies. The flies there are just ridiculous. It actually wasn't terrible when we were there, but the problem is they're just, first of all, it's a constant buzzing. It just never goes away. Second of all, these flies, and I've been told that this was one of our guides. He said at times his entire back would be covered with flies. You can't even see the shirt. That's how bad it gets. And the flies don't bite, but what they do is arguably even more annoying. They want liquid. So what they do is they fly up to the corners of your eye and try to suck the liquid out of your eye. They fly up your nose. They fly in your mouth. So you're constantly trying to get rid of these flies. And it really just, it can drive you to distraction. Of course, every video you shoot has flies buzzing in the background. So fortunately, they brought some of these with us. That's my friend Chris. And you put on these head nets like that. And it doesn't stop the buzzing, but it keeps the flies from going in your eyes and mouth and nose, which is really important. So if you ever go to Australia, be aware of this. Once you get out of the cities, that the flies just, they become extremely bothersome. All right, so we're driving and we saw a camel. I'm like, okay, why is there a camel here? Well, it turns out back in the 1800s, someone had the bright idea to bring camels to Australia to use as transport, particularly in the outback, because of course they can carry a lot and they don't need much in the way of water. And no, they don't store water in the hump. The humps are fats. That's a myth. But the camels started multiplying. And by the time we got to the 1900s, we had trains, we had cars, we had trucks. So they decided they didn't need the camels anymore and they let them go. The camels started multiplying in the outback. And at one point they were up to over 1 million camels, which was more camels than they had in the Middle East. So then they decided they had a camel problem. And over the past, I think maybe 30, 40 years, they decided to try to cull all the camels. And from what I understand, they're down to about 300,000 now. But this one was not wild. It was behind a fence, but you can see camels wandering around in the outback, which is a little bit strange. You don't expect to see them there, obviously not native. And we finally got to see kangaroos. This was in a cemetery, and those are plastic flowers, but they were there eating the grass. And here's an adult with a young kangaroo there. And kangaroos are marsupials, which means they bear their young life, but then the young grow up in the pouch. All the mammals in Australia are marsupials, except for rats and bats, I believe. It's a really strange sight. You be driving along, you see some various kind of marsupial, and you see a little head poking out, which is, to me, it's like a scene out of Alien to see a head poking out of another animal, but that's what you see there. Only the females carry the young. Oh, and at Bowers Station, we had just the most beautiful moonsets because there were no buildings around there. There were no lights. So everything at night was crystal clear. You could see the Milky Way clearly, and just had this beautiful moonset one night, or moonrise, I should say. All right, flew east to Brisbane, and about 2 hours south of Brisbane is a very famous birding place called O'Reilly's Rainforest Retreat. Not only famous for its parrots, but famous for birding in general. And that area is a rainforest, so you see very different kinds of birds and animals. And if you ever get a chance to go to O'Reilly's, it's an absolutely fabulous place. They have gorgeous buildings there. It's up in the mountains overlooking the valleys. They have a glowworm grotto you can go to at night. They have a botanical garden with ancient forms. They have a treetop walk. They just have all kinds of great places to go there and to see. So it's very common on the birding circuit. We, of course, went there for the parrots because for several hours, oh, actually, before I even said it, so here are more sulfur-crested cockatoos. But for several hours a day, they have a birding area open where all the wild birds fly in, and you can get some feed from them and then hand feed the birds. So this is a crimson rosella, arguably one of the most beautiful birds in the world. And they're very friendly. You can walk right up to them. These little guys are red-browed finches, and it looks like someone dipped a pen in wax and just drew it across the eyebrows. It's sort of red and shiny, very pretty little finches. You see the difference in size. And you see how gorgeous this bird is. That's Chris holding one, because they'll just fly and land on you. Always looking for a handout. And then you have food in the bowls. And technically you're supposed to feed them from the bowls, but the birds don't read the instructions, so they land right on you. They have the most adorable faces. There's me holding one. And they'll just land all over you. And there's like a cafeteria there you can eat at, and the birds just come in and take your food there also. And not just the parrots. I mean, all the birds come in, all different kinds of birds. They just come land on your table, start eating your food. That one's holding an almond. And of course, this is not good food for them, but we'll go try to tell them that. And this is a female king parrot. I know she's female because the green extends down the chest. And this is a male. They're all red. These are rather large birds. There are 2 other species of king parrots in Indonesia. This is the only one in Australia. Just a strikingly beautiful bird. There's a male on the right and a female on the left. And there's also, they actually have bright blue rumps. They have some blue up here and a little bit of turquoise on the wing as well. This call is interesting. Watch how he pumps his tail. It reminded me of like a water well where you pump the handle to bring up water. And these beautiful finches again. Even the finches weren't afraid of us. So this is a Regent bowerbird, which is actually the emblem of O'Reilly's. Bowerbirds, they actually have 2 different types of bowerbirds there, the Regent and the Satin, which you'll also see. And bowerbirds became really well known with David Attenborough's Life of Birds. Bowerbirds are birds that build a bower, or the males build sort of a staging area or a platform where they may collect things or they build structures, and the females come to the bowers, and the males sing and dance and show off what they've collected, and the female either says, okay, you're worthy, let's mate, or they fly off to another bower to visit another male. So another strikingly gorgeous bird. I was feeding this one some raisins, which apparently are appropriate for them. And this is the satin bowerbird, striking violet eyes. And that one's pinching I think it's a French fry from a table. This is the male again, but the females are gorgeous. They're bright green. And we were very lucky walking around. I actually found a bower. So this looks just like the one that David Attenborough was showing. The satin bowerbird is the one that collects the bright blue stuff. And this structure in the middle is where the male will hang out in here, and the female walks up, and he sort of pops out and does this little thing here. And then he goes back into this little shed thing he's made. And what's interesting is the blue is almost all exactly the same color. We found one of the bower back when we were at Bower Station. It was made of nuts and bolts that a bowerbird had collected from a nearby construction site. But we don't know what kind of bowerbird because that wasn't a usual one that anybody knew about. But it was the same sort of a structure. So it was really exciting to me to see this because I remembered that scene from David Attenborough quite well. Okay, this is a pattymellon also, but spelled differently. It's a small marsupial, sort of like a mini kangaroo, comes up to about your knees, and they come out at sunset and just wander around eating grasses and things. And they're just so adorable. All right, on the way back up into Brisbane, before we flew out, we stopped at Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary, which is, they do rescue and rehab there, but they also have a large collection of native Australian animals. And we went there specifically because you get to hold koalas there. They have a feeding area where wild lorikeets come in and they have nectar there. It was pouring rain there, so we were the only ones there, as you can see here. But these, again, are all wild birds that come in. And these are a scaly-breasted lorikeet, another species of lorikeet. They always look like they're spoiling for a fight, though, the way they look at you. And this is a brush turkey, not related at all to our turkeys, about the size of a female wild turkey. I don't know if you have those in California, but we have a lot of them out east here, but not at all related. It's not something that anybody eats. All right, this is going to be loud. This is what lorikeets sound like in the wild. That's just to give you an idea what wild parrots sound like. And they were finding some apple and greens to eat. And these guys don't really walk, they hop, which is interesting. Oh, there's the brush turkey. So you can get an idea of the scale. See how they hop around. So a lorikeet, so I want to give you an idea of scale because it's going to be important. A lorikeet is about the size of, like a Steller's jay for you guys. So a brush turkey is the size of our turkeys. So that's going to be important. Oh, in this area, they had kangaroos there who tend to lie around, but you can feed them. They're very, very gentle. That's a wallaby, which is, again, another marsupial related to a kangaroo. And they had emus there. We saw emus all over the place. I love emus, one of the larger birds, sort of related to ostriches and rheas and such. And I was feeding them, almost as tall as me. And I was trying to get the shot where they look in your face, and I finally succeeded. So I love emus. And we got to hold our koalas. Surprisingly heavy, and they're very solid. So it was like holding a very heavy bowling ball. Okay, so we flew up to Cairns and we stayed a night at a place called Cassowary Lodge. Now, this place is well known because birders will come here from around the world as one of the few reliable places to see a cassowary. There's no guarantee, and these are wild cassowaries, but they do tend to hang out around here. And the people live in this house who own it. So I want to give you an idea of scale. You remember the brush turkey, size of a turkey? Here's a brush turkey, and here's a cassowary. This is the second largest bird in the world, second only to the ostrich. It's an incredibly bizarre looking prehistoric bird. Again, here you can see the size comparison. Both males and females have these casques on top of the head. They're made of keratin and nobody knows what they're used for. And they have this wild coloring on their skin, oranges and blues and purples. But again, males and females have the same coloring, so it's not a male thing for attracting them. And the feathers are very primitive. They're very coarse, and they're very primitive feathers. They only have one, I don't know what you call them, one little bit of feather that comes off each main stem. And this is what they're known for. So this is called the killing toe. As I said, cassowaries are very large, and if frightened, they will attack and kill things. They have killed 2 humans. One was only a couple of years ago. It was somebody that, I think it was, let's say, was it in the US or Australia? It was somebody that was raising cassowaries, and the bird attacked and killed the person. They're more known for killing dogs and other creatures. They're very afraid of dogs, and dogs being dogs will go after them. So what they'll do is they'll take that toe and they'll lift their leg up and rip down through the abdomen of the animal and just disembowel the animal, and the animal dies. So people are very careful around cassowaries. They can kill a human easily if they want to. So you really don't want to anger or annoy a cassowary. I said they're very hard to see, so people come to, and this place, I have to say that, I mean, I saw some incredible birds. They put out some, just like if you go to Costa Rica or anywhere in the Caribbean or Central America, they put out feeders with fruit and bananas and things, and all kinds of incredible birds fly in too. So you don't just see cassowaries there, but you watch them from the viewing platform, because obviously you don't want to be with them. But you can walk around the grounds, and so after we had spent some time, I went for a walk. The cassowaries had wandered off, and I was just walking around down below, and the cassowaries came back. They feed them, by the way, I should say. They put out like whole watermelons and all kinds of melons and things, and the cassowaries come and just eat these large amounts of fruit. So they do tend to wander up frequently. So I was there, and the cassowaries came. So I just froze, because obviously I don't want to upset the cassowaries. And they started to walk by me, which is fine. I mean, you can see how enormous they are. And then this one came, the second one came, was very close to me. And you can see these beautiful long eyelashes. And then it realized I was there and turned and looked at me. And I read that this bird is the same height as me. So this bird was looking into my eyes from a few feet away, and I just froze. My blood ran cold, and I just stood there absolutely still, and he just stared and stared and stared, and then turned and walked on his way. But for a minute there, I have to admit, I was a little bit scared. And there they are. One last look at this magnificent bird. If you get to Australia, it's really worth it to go up to Cassowary Lodge there. All right, then we went to the Atherton Tablelands, which is a very rich area around, that's outside Cairns. It's where they grow most of the fruits and vegetables for Australia. So it's very agriculturally rich, rolling hills, green hills, just gorgeous, and unlike any other place I saw in Australia. So one morning, our target bird was called the double-eyed fig parrot. Very hard to see. They had allotted half a morning for us to try to find this parrot, and didn't have a high hope of success. And so we went to this area where there were fig trees, and there was a lake and everything. And so this is a fig tree. These are little tiny figs. And this bird is actually called a fig bird, and very lovely. This is the male. So I said, well, you know, are we looking for the fig parrot in the fig tree? And our bird guide, being kind of a typical bird guide, was like, oh, Amy, of course not. I mean, just because it's named a fig parrot doesn't mean all you have to do is look in fig trees. And, you know, we're going to spend hours looking for this bird. It could be anywhere, you know. I said, well, there's a fig bird. And he said, yeah, but you're not going to find a fig parrot sitting in a fig tree. I mean, that's just ridiculous. He was, you know, being very condescending to me. So while he was looking away in the fig tree, I see this. I was like, oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that a fig parrot? Beautiful little bird, tiny, tiny. Fig parrots are the smallest of the parrots. So they're only like this, oops, moving the camera, that big. And here the fig parrot is in the fig tree eating figs. The faces look like, it's like a little clown face. And then he flew, this is a male, he flew right next to the tree that was right next to me. I mean, at this point, I'm maybe 3 feet away from this bird. So I said to him, well, isn't that a fig parrot? And he's like, huh. And he turns around, he looks, and he's like, oh my God, it's a fig parrot. And he goes running, Chris had wandered off somewhere else, so he ran running to find her. And I started taking pictures of this adorable little bird. So, and he was really upset, of course, because I found the bird, not him, as well. As you know, I'm sure you've had experience with bird guides that are like that as well. But he was very upset because I actually found the fig parrot in the fig tree. But the most adorable little bird. I mean, how could you not love a face like that? And this is the female. She's only slightly less colorful. And see, even there's yellow on the wings. And you couldn't ask for a better background against which to photograph a bird as well. All right, so the last target bird we had was the red-tailed black cockatoo. Now, black cockatoo is actually, it's not black as a description, but it's actually black-dash cockatoo is the name of the bird. And there are, I think, 5 black cockatoos in Australia. 3 are very hard to find, they're very rare. We only saw 1, which is the red-tailed black. This is a very large bird. The black cockatoos and the palm cockatoos are the largest of the parrots in Australia. So about close to 2 feet long. So very large birds. Males and females are very dimorphic. Now it's females, this is a male. And here's where you can see the difference. So females have speckles all over their bodies, males are solid. Females have striped tails, which are yellow, orange, and red. And so these 3 are females. The males have tails with 1 big red blotch. And females have light colored beaks, the males have dark colored beaks. So there's no doubting which is which in this species. There's a female. Now what they're doing is walking. This is a peanut field. We went to this farmer and his peanuts have already been harvested. So while the peanuts there, he hates having the cockatoos because the cockatoos will dig up the peanuts. But once the peanuts are harvested, he loves having the cockatoos come because they clean up all the debris. And their crests are huge and they go all the way forward when they want to. So they were just digging among the dirt, and there were hundreds of them. Here's up in the trees. There you can see her beautiful tail. You can see how they just fill the trees. And this is them walking along. We were actually there a couple days. The first day, most of the photos didn't come out. You see that shimmering? It's like on hot pavement. But I've never seen that on the ground. So every photo, every video had this shimmering effect on it. I've only ever seen that with pavement before. Just so you can get an idea of the noise level. Yeah, they just filled the trees. That's a pair of them hanging out. Just skip through a lot of this. Just gonna see. And I always kind of laugh when I have a few crows that sort of live around my area, and whenever I think they're loud, I always think about the cockatoos. There's nothing like seeing a flock of them across the sky like this. All right, so remember that pale-headed rosella early on? Well, this is another pale-headed rosella, except this one is not pale. It's very bright, bright yellow, bright blue, bright red, bright green. Same exact species, just in a different location. And bright red on the underside of the tail. Okay, so I saw a fair amount of reptiles. I had to include this one. So I assume most of you have seen the original Jurassic Park. And you remember that scene when the guy who plays Newman from from Seinfeld, comes across all these little lizards, and he's like, oh, aren't they cute? And then he starts getting angry, and he's kicking them, and he's making fun of them and everything. And then all of a sudden they shoot out this giant frill that comes out from their head and attack him and eat him. Well, that's this guy. They actually patterned that right after this guy. He's called a frilled lizard. This is actually a very long lizard. He's about 3 feet long, including his tail. It's a rather large lizard. And this is a folded up frill. And apparently when he gets angry, the whole thing shoots out. I don't think they eat people, but I could certainly see how they were inspired by that. You can get this giant frill, which I didn't get to see, but I certainly had a healthy respect for this guy when I saw him. This was at another sort of a state park we went to. And they had rock wallabies there, which is very small, sort of kangaroo-like marsupial. And they're very friendly. You can see the size of them there. And they come up to you and they have specially made pellets you can feed them. Very, very gentle. The paws are very gentle. And they very gently just nibble the pellets out of your hands. Okay, bats. We found out there was a place called Tolga Bat Hospital or Bat Center there. It's a big bat rescue rehab sanctuary for bats. And Chris and I both love bats. So we said we wanted to go there, and they dropped us off for an afternoon. Now, this is a little bat, which in the US we would just call a bat. Over there, they call these microbats because most of their bats are these, which are called macrobats. And you've probably seen pictures of these. They're also called flying foxes because their heads look very much like foxes or dogs. And they have quite a few there. They took us through the sanctuary. In Australia, they don't have rabies, but they have a similar virus, and we weren't allowed to handle them because just like you have to be immunized against rabies here to handle bats in a rehab facility, there you have to be immunized against the virus that they have. So, but we did get up close to them, and they're really quite adorable, beautiful animals. A lot of them come in because of the barbed wire fences, and they catch their wings on them. And the wings are very fragile in bats, so the barbed wire just rips the wings. And a lot of times you find dead bats on them, or the bats are alive and hanging. So the rehabbers get called out to rescue the bats and bring them in here. What's interesting is they're known as fruit eaters, but they don't actually eat fruit. What they do is they take the fruit and they squeeze all the juice out and drink that, and they drop the fruit, and then other animals come along and eat the fruit. And so they have these containers filled with fruit juice, and they lick the juice out. And they're really very adorable animals. I mean, look at these faces. This one's doing its best Dracula imitation. Okay, the last section of the trip is down in South Australia and Victoria. So we flew down to Adelaide. Here's some more rainbow lorikeets. Rainbow lorikeets, interestingly, have become quite an issue in Australia. There's some areas they're native to, but they've now spread into all the adjoining areas, and they've become quite invasive. And they will push out native birds. They've taken over nests. So they've become a really big problem in much of Australia. Again, grazing on the ground and eating green stuff. This beautiful bird is the eastern rosella, another rosella species, one of my favorites, also just absolutely gorgeous. And this one shows a juvenile in the lower left. Beautiful green scalloped back. Most of the parrots all seem to eat the same thing as all the other parrots, interestingly. This is a crimson rosella, but it's bright orange because it's the it's the Adelaide race of crimson rosellas, only found in the Adelaide area. And this yellow rosella is actually also a crimson rosella, but there's a yellow race found around the Murray River. So that's why I mean, it can be a little bit difficult figuring out which rosella you're looking at, because even the same species comes in many different colors. The only thing you can really be sure of a lot of the times is that it is a rosella. And this beautiful parrot is a musk lorikeet, another one of the many lorikeet species. Males and females look the same, and it's this cute little cute little tail. And the parrots in Australia nest in hollows. They do not create the hollows, and most of the hollows are in trees that are very old. And unfortunately, those are the trees that the paper industry values. So the trees get cut down, and there's a tremendous shortage of nest hollows for parrots and other animals as well in Australia. A beautiful bird. And you can see that the male and female look identical. This is a red-rumped parrot. Much like our red-bellied woodpeckers in the east here, I don't know if you have those out west, you don't tend to see the red rump. I was lucky enough to actually see a red rump. Interestingly, this bird is the equivalent of our little brown jobs here in the US. So it's very common. It hangs out in the grass most of the time. You don't often see them in trees. It's out in the grass. And even though it's obviously magnificently colored, because it's in the grass most of the time, it blends in and people just don't see it or notice it. So a lot of people are not aware that they've even seen red-rumped parrots, which is crazy. Here in the US, if that was in the tree, you'd go, oh my God, that's the most gorgeous bird. But there you just don't even notice them. Just very pretty little bird. As I said, showing off his red rump here. All right, this is a parrot called the bluebonnet, very oddly colored bird, and a lot of variation from bird to bird. It can have a mostly red breast, it can have just a tiny bit of red on it. A lot of variation in this bird. I don't have any great pictures, but I want to show them. The one on the right here is a juvenile. You can see a difference between the juvenile and the parent. This is a regent parrot, and it is very elegant, as the name would suggest. This is a female. Also hard to find, but we just happened to come across a flock of them right next to our car. So, and here's the male, who's sort of brilliant yellow, very long-tailed parrot. And this is how you often see them. They, again, walking on the ground. You can see how long that tail is. And this is the other ringneck, Australian ringneck I mentioned. I told you we saw two species, and this one's called the Maley. So instead of having a black head, it has a green and blue head with a red stripe above its beak. Not at all afraid of us. We were right next to him. He was right next to the car, and we just pulled up and couldn't care less that we were there. It's a strikingly beautiful bird. He's eating some clover. I mean, we were probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet away from this bird, and didn't bother him in the least that we were there. Again, as you can see, in the typical parrot way, taking food and bringing the food up to his mouth. This is the other corella we saw, the long-billed corella. It's kind of a weird looking bird. So it does have this very long beak. It has this big bare patch around its eye, and it has this red across its throat. And our guide was saying the way you remember the difference between long-billed corella and the little corella, it looks like someone took a knife and drew it across the throat. So kind of a gruesome image, but you don't forget it. This is my Clean Bird, Dirty Bird series. Again, look how dirty the cockatoo on the right is. This is a little corella in a nest hollow, and he's watching me suspiciously, wants to make sure I'm not a predator. So he's popped out a little bit. And more galahs. This is a sulfur-crested cockatoo coming into a nest hollow, and then he saw us. So he's looking again, checking to make sure if we're a predator or not. And then he finally flew off. I did get pretty good at finding koalas in the wild. If you look up at the top of trees, sometimes you see something that just doesn't look right, and then you focus in on it and you realize there is a koala up there. So I did find a few of them. All right, and then the last section we went to is the Grampians, which is a mountainous area. So they do actually get snow up there, and it's a very different environment, so you have different animals. The place we stayed at is called Kookaburra Lodge. So you had a room, and then you had a little patio behind your room, and the birds were all lined up in the fence waiting for you. So these are more sulfur-crested cockatoos, and they were very clearly used to being fed. So of course we had crackers with us, and we give them crackers, which is not appropriate food, but they kind of mug you for the food, and you give them what you have. And you can see each of them holding a cracker in their hand. Now, I think most people, if you're not used to parrots, you might be quite scared by this, but we were delighted. And that's a kangaroo paddock behind us in some mountains. This guy is huge, and he flew down and he just landed on you. So here's this enormous bird landing. He was on Chris's arm there. And again, if you weren't a parrot person, this would be quite frightening. And he was very demanding. So if you started giving food to any other bird or not paying attention to him, he'd actually reach over and bite you. So he was a pretty aggressive bird. And obviously not at all afraid of us. On Chris's shoulder. I mean, yeah, you have to be pretty brave to have a bird that has a can opener for a mouth sit on you. And then you'd look up at the eaves along the top of the building, and the birds were up there staring down at you. It was like a scene out of the birds sometimes. So Chris went into the room, and they of course just followed her, and they're all just staring at her, waiting for her to come out with food. You wake up in the morning, you pull the curtains back, and there they are, they're staring at you. This one's trying to figure out how to open the door. You open the door and they come right up, and they could walk right in your room, and but basically they're waiting for some food. You always had birds staring at you, and other birds too. Like up here, there's a currawong, and there were magpies and everything waiting for you. Always just staring. Here's a picture where you can actually see a lot of cockatoos do have a patch on their face, but a lot of times it's so pale that you can't see it unless you're really up close. And this bird's like a foot away from me, so they're very close. The chairs are like that because, of course, it was raining. But most of them were polite. There was just that one that was really aggressive. See, the other birds are flying in too. The other birds wouldn't come right up to our hands, but they were quick to pick up anything that was dropped. So that's a currawong, which actually has a really beautiful voice. All right, and then the last target bird was a Gangan cockatoo, which is one of my favorites. They were kind of hard to find, but we did get a tip that turned out to be good. And this is the male. They have this just wild hairdo. It's just incredible. The most magnificent crest. And we actually found a few of them. And they have a voice that sounds like a squeaky door that needs oil. This is the female. She doesn't have a red head, but she has some red striping on her chest. That's also lovely. And this is what they were eating. I forget the name of it, some kind of a nut. Of course, we were staying at Kookaburra Lodge, and the kookaburras actually came in at sunset to the place because the guy would feed them there who had it. We did see a lot of, there's several different types of kookaburras, and we did see them too. You kind of have to see kookaburras if you go to Australia. They're also, they are actually kingfishers. They're the largest of the kingfishers. They are meat eaters, which you'll see in a second. They're also really lovely birds. Kookaburras, if you remember the old Tarzan movies, when you hear that, ooh, ah, 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 that's supposed to be a monkey. That's actually a kookaburra making the sound. They use kookaburra soundtrack for the Tarzan movies. This is the other fairy wren I was telling you about, the superb one as opposed to the splendid one. Also lovely little bird. And I just had to show you these kangaroos doing like the, was it Kangaroo Jack, the movie where they fight each other in boxing. They actually do this in real life. It's so funny to watch them doing this. And one of them was actually pushing the other over. So they really do box. I just had to show you this, Australia has a few of these pink lakes. It's some sort of algae that gives it a pink color, which is really lovely. And that's a canola field in the background. So beautiful contrast. All right, and then just a couple slides away, this is Sydney. Of course, I have to show the Opera House because, you can't go to Australia and not see the Opera House. And the Sydney Harbour Bridge. People actually climb up here, and there are actually people up there now. They have a tour that goes up there to the top. I guess not for the faint of heart. And then the last parrot of the trip was a rainbow lorikeet. This was the Sydney Botanical Gardens, which are quite beautiful. This is actually about, I want to say 30 feet high. I don't remember what kind of plant it was, but I saw a rainbow lorikeet at the top. So that was my last parrot of the trip. And my friend Chris, there were a few of her photos in here, and we went with Avian Discovery Tours. So just want to give thanks for them. It was a fabulous trip. And that's it for me. Let's see. How do I get out of screen share? Stop share. There we go. And that's it.
Thank you, Amy. That was wonderful. You have some great photos.
Thank you. Oh, and my background here, by the way, is was in someplace outside Alice Springs, where we did see Brooks Parrots at sunset, but it was so dark I couldn't get any good pictures of them. But this is a permanent watering hole, and all kinds of animals were coming into this watering hole. So I thought I'd throw that up as a background.
Are there any questions? You can unmute yourselves and ask away.
Which time of the year did you travel?
It was September, which is their springtime.
Thank you.
It's a good time of year to go because it's not too hot usually then. In our case, it actually turned out to be cold. It was cold and rainy. There were a lot of power outages. So sometimes it actually got really cold, but that's not the norm. That's not the norm. You definitely don't want to go there in the summer because it's just brutally hot there.
Would you like to go back?
Would I like to? Oh, I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a country the size of the US, so even a month isn't a lot of time. And there was some premier birding areas we couldn't get to because the roads were actually washed out. So there were some major birding areas. There were certain bird species we should have seen, but we couldn't even get to those areas.
And thank you for mentioning that the parrots in Australia, walk along the ground, and the ones in South America are up in the trees. I always thought they were up in the trees, so that's.
You know, a lot of people think that a lot of well, in Africa, there are certain parrots that are ground birds and certain that are boreal. So it's sort of a mixture, but a lot of people just think of parrots as a species and the different types as breeds like dogs, but it's not. There are close to 400 species of parrots, and they're all different, and they eat different things. They have different behaviors, but a lot of it tends to fall out by continent. So it can be very different. The parrots in Australia are a lot easier to see because they often are on the ground or on bare wood. Whereas when you go to Central and South America, it can be a lot harder to see parrots because they're often up in the trees and they're very well camouflaged.
Amy, what's the difference in the behavior of the major Mitchell cockatoo compared to some of the others? I've never had one.
You don't see them a lot in captivity because they tend to be very difficult to keep. So it's very uncommon to see one, but they actually behave very similar to the galahs. And I think I had a video I probably cut short, but that a lot of times you'll see the galahs and the lead-bearer cockatoos together. And they're of a similar size too, but from what I've read, they're, at least in captivity, they're much more high-strung and they're less adapted to captivity, so that's why you don't see them. But in the wild, the behaviors tend to be really similar. But it's striking because, here as a bird watcher in the US, you're always having to sneak up on birds and use blinds, and they're very skittish and they fly off. They don't seem to care. I mean, you walk up to them, they're like, okay, whatever, I mean, there it's very common for people to say walk outside and put some seed in their hair or something, and the birds just fly over. They'll fly over to their balcony and walk around or come over their hands. I mean, strange birds, not birds that have been acclimated to it. Whereas here, that just doesn't happen, other than with various, gulls that will come in and snatch your French fries. But it's just very different. The birds are just not, and also so many of them are bigger than our birds here and more colorful than our birds. So it's it's very weird. I mean, to pull up next to a bird on the side of the road and open your window and stick your camera out in its face, and it's like, okay, I don't care. It's very weird. I mean, if you go to the Galapagos, it's even weirder because there they really don't care.
Amy, would you go a different time of the year or different locations if you went back?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I went back, I would try to go to places that I didn't get to go. I'd love to visit the western part of the country because there's all different stuff there. We spent, other than one day in Sydney, we weren't in cities at all, so we really didn't get to see any of that stuff.
Wow.
Things to keep in mind if you go to Australia. Again, I wasn't in the cities. Outside the cities, the food is just terrible, especially if you're not a beef eater, because like 90% of what they eat is beef. It's beef and it's fried into a patty, into some sort of a pastry shell or something. So I found the food to be just terrible. And also their internet is the worst of any developed country. So the internet is like dial-up modem speed most of the places. So just keep that in mind if you go to Australia. But yeah, I mean, it's a huge country, so there's so much to see.
Would you go in the spring again?
That's a nice time of year to go. I mean, either the spring or the fall. The spring's nice because you have all the baby birds and everything. Right. The winter's probably the most comfortable. But winter, it other than a few places, it doesn't go below freezing. So you're going to see birds year round easily.
Amy, this is Jan. I just wanted to comment. Thank you so much. And I I couldn't, you got such spectacular photos and the videos. I really enjoyed everything. And I know after every bird, I went, wow, look at that, look at that, look at that. And I'm glad you mentioned you were on an avian tour because I have been to Australia and spent quite a bit of time there. I, in fact, climbed the Sydney Bridge. It isn't, they make it out like you got to be, an ultra marathon person to do it, and not true. Great view up there. So I recommend it if you go back. And I saw one kookaburra. That was it. I don't think I saw any parrots. Unfortunately, did not see a cassowary, but I did see one like at a zoo where they had an exhibit, and it was just like, thank God it was behind glass, and I looked at it, it was as tall as me, just what you said, and it was a little bit terrifying because it wasn't moving at all. And it's like, oh man, it's so big.
Now you understand how terrifying it was to have one, about 3 feet away from me with nothing in between. And when it turned and stared at me, oh my God, I was just like,
Yeah. But it's wonderful. I didn't even realize Australia had parrots, until I saw your other presentation, because I didn't see any there. But
were you only in the cities?
Mostly. It was a very extensive tour. We flew all over the place, but mostly in the cities. So we had good food too.
Yeah. One other thing to mention, by the way, if you go to Australia in our fall, like September, is remember that everything is reversed there. So their flu season is in the fall. Ours is, it's actually in the summer going into fall. Ours is in the fall going into winter and spring. So I get my yearly flu shot, but by September it's worn off. And our guide got the flu when we were in Cairns. He was very, very sick for a few days. I got it from him. I got even more sick. It went into pneumonia. I was really, the last 2 weeks of the trip, I was actually quite ill. Extremely ill. And because my flu shot had worn off. So if I were to do it again, when I got there, I would get a new flu shot once I got there.
Good
Because
point.
you don't even think about it till
You
it
still
happens.
got amazing photos for being that sick. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, you have to go back. Now you know how to do it.
I mean, it's really, it's an incredible place to go birding. And again, I only showed a few other non-parrot birds, but I saw thousands of other birds. So 2 species of kookaburras, and there are, I think, like 3 or 4 of them. But I mean, the birds are incredible. And again, when you go there, you're not going to know anything other than the house sparrow and the pigeon and the mallard, those 3 that are around the world. So everything is a new bird to you. Every bird song is a new bird song to you. So it's exciting. It's not like you're trying to find the one bird you haven't seen. Everything there is going to be a lifer for you. So
I've been looking on Nextdoor and all the patches. Everything is so green back east, and all the different birds. It's quite exciting. I'm thinking, what am I doing here?
yeah,
all
right
the
now,
trees.
Yeah, we don't usually get it doesn't usually get dry here till like August. So right now it's everything is really, really lush.
And all the babies being born, the fawns.
Yeah. I was watching a baby downy woodpecker today.
Really?
Yeah, they're so cute.
What's your next trip?
Oh, I don't know. I have nothing planned right now. So
Sounds good. Well,
yeah. And Jan, you're going to have to go back to Australia.
It's hard to get there now.
Well, right now you can't go. But see, that's the thing. If you're going to go someplace like Australia, you might as well go for a few weeks, because it takes you 2 days each way to get there. I mean, it's such a long trip that to go for a couple weeks is, or a week and a half, it's not worth it. Oh, another thing, when you fly inside of Australia, the airlines have these strict limits it's on weight of your luggage. So it's not like here where you could fly between any two cities and you're not limited. There you're very limited. So it was I want to say like 20 kilos or 15 kilos or something. You don't carry a lot. So we're constantly having to redistribute stuff. Our guide wasn't carrying much, so we'd have to put some stuff in his, and it's this whole big thing because, you know, by the time you're done with your binoculars and your cameras and all that, your luggage is always going to be over. So
Did you check any of your items?
this was checked.
Okay,
This wasn't carry-on. This was
when I
checked.
went to South Africa and we flew, I mean, I couldn't take everything to the safari because of the weight.
Yeah, but this is just flying between cities in Australia. You're really limited to the amount of weight that you're allowed to carry. So you have to try to pack as light as you can if you go over there. You're going to get there, and it's not like they'll let you pay for the overage. You just have a flat amount, and then that's it.
And so you did laundry when you were there?
Yeah. Oh yeah. 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 But you know, you just want to try to pack as light as possible. But I mean, you can't beat the bird, excuse me, the bird life there. And I was at, you know, when I saw the bowerbirds, I was actually almost sort of embarrassed for them. Here are these magnificent bowerbirds, the subject of David Attenborough's documentary. And here they are eating French fries and stuff. It's like, you know, don't you have any shame or anything? You know, for like saying, you're such beautiful, elegant birds and you're eating French fries. I mean, but they are gorgeous, you know, and as I said, so many of the birds will come to you. So
Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, well, thank you again, Amy. It was a wonderful
Welcome.
presentation. We do appreciate you doing this for us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Are you guys going to